Jack Holler never aimed to raise a kid. Out past the edge of his ranch, where fence wire meets open sky, Jack found a boy sitting quiet on a splintered post, dust on his boots, saddlebag at his feet, and eyes too old for 10 years. No note, no name but Eli, just a broken compass clutched tight in his hand. Jack figured he'd feed him a few meals, keep him safe, and find out who left him. But before the sun even set, a land agent named Bernard Strake showed up claiming the boy's inheritance, and the land beside Jack's too. With a polished grin and papers that smelled of ink and lies, Strake said the boy had no next of kin. But Jack? Jack saw something different in Eli's eyes, something worth fighting for. As storms roll in, the lies grow louder. A broken deed, a burned bunkhouse, a town caught between silence and justice. Can one cowboy stand tall against a system built to swallow the weak? Or will the boy lose everything, again? If you believe a man's worth is measured by what he protects, not what he owns, saddle up and subscribe. This ride's got heart, grit, and the kind of justice that don't wear a badge. The east pasture of Holler Ranch stretched long and quiet beneath a sky so wide it felt like the world might fall into it. Jack Holler rode slow that morning, reins slack in his left hand, the other holding a half-peeled apple he hadn't finished since dawn. His horse, Dusty, stepped easy through the tall grass, ears twitching at the wind's soft whistle. Jack figured he'd check the outer fence line before noon. Weather had been dry, and coyotes liked to squeeze under where the woods sagged. But as he rounded the bend near the old cottonwoods, he spotted something odd. A boy, no taller than a fence post, perched right on the top rail like he'd been carved there, still as stone, just watching the wind. Jack slowed his horse. "You lost, son?" The boy didn't answer right away, just clutched the saddlebag at his side tighter. It looked too heavy for his frame. Jack dismounted, boots crunching soft against the dust. He took a few steps closer, careful not to spook him. "How long you been sitting there?" "Since dark," the boy said, voice dry and scratchy. "Didn't know where else to go." Jack squinted. The kid couldn't have been more than 10. Thin shoulders, sunburnt cheeks, and eyes that had already seen too much. A compass hung around his neck by a bit of leather strap, its glass cracked, needle frozen. Jack nodded toward the bag. "That yours?" The boy looked down. "Was my pa's." Jack exhaled. "Where's he now?" The boy didn't answer. He didn't have to. Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "Name's Jack. You hungry?" The boy nodded once. "I'm Eli." "Well, Eli," Jack said, "how about we get you off that fence and into some shade?" He helped the boy down, light as a sack of feed, and walked him back to the house, Dusty trailing behind. The bunkhouse kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee and bacon, and Jack rustled up what was left: 2 biscuits, some salted ham, and a tin of peach preserves. Eli ate like he hadn't had anything warm in days. Jack sat across the table, arms folded. "You from around here?" The boy nodded, mouth full. "Over the ridge. Pa said it was Bell land." Jack's brow furrowed. Bell land backed right up against his eastern boundary. Hadn't seen movement out there in weeks. "Your pa ever mention a man named Strake?" Eli's spoon stopped midair. "Said he was trouble." Jack leaned back, chewing that word like gristle. Bernard Strake was a land agent, slick, loud, and always carrying more papers than sense. He'd been sniffing around the valley for months now, whispering about claims and inheritance loopholes. Jack had run him off his porch twice already. Later that afternoon, Jack was mending a bit of fence near the barn when he saw a buggy roll up the main road, 2 white horses, clean harness, and a man in a gray pinstripe suit at the reins. Bernard Strake. He pulled up and tipped his hat with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon, Mr. Holler. Fine day to review land boundaries." Jack didn't smile. "Didn't know we had any that needed reviewing." "Oh, it's not your place, of course. Just the parcel adjacent. Unclaimed, I believe. The late Mr. Bell's. No heir listed, far as we can tell." Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "That's so." Strake stepped down, patting his vest like he was smoothing out the lies. "Probate office is clear on it. I'm filing to assume the land for county resale. Waste of good soil otherwise. Jack looked him straight in the eye. You file anything before the man was buried? Strake's grin twitched. From the barn window, Eli peeked out, compass swinging gently on his chest. And as Strake walked away, Jack noticed the man slip something to the sheriff who had come along for the ride, a quiet shake, and the unmistakable jingle of silver. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen land taken, seen it stolen in broad daylight. But now it had a boy's face. And Jack Holler wasn't about to let that go unanswered. Jack Holler had seen a lot of things blow through his land, cattle rustlers, prairie fire, even a flash flood one summer that nearly took the porch. But nothing settled in like a bad man with a paper trail and a handshake that smelled like smoke. 2 mornings after Strake's visit, a red ribbon notice appeared nailed to the old fence post at the edge of the Bell property. Jack spotted it from his saddle, ink still damp in the sun. It was official and smug. Notice of abandonment and county transfer, filed by B. Strake, land agent. Below that, in smaller print, no known heir, probated and confirmed, seizure in progress. Jack ripped it down and folded it once, slow. Eli was in the barn brushing Dusty, humming a tune his voice hadn't grown into yet. Jack stepped in and leaned on the stall. Got some news, he said. Eli turned. Is it about my pa's place? Jack hesitated. There's a fella saying nobody's left to claim it. He's posting papers saying the land's up for grabs. Eli's brows scrunched. But I'm left. I know, Jack said gently, but paper's louder than truth till someone proves otherwise. They ate a quiet breakfast, cornbread, beans, and thick coffee Jack let Eli dilute with cream. Then Jack saddled up and rode into town. The courthouse sat squat at the end of Main Street, next to the feed store and just across from the chapel. He'd been in that building 3 times in his life, twice for cattle permits, once to vote. Inside, the air was stale with dust and ink. The clerk, a soft-eyed man named Merton Pike, adjusted his glasses when Jack stepped up. Mr. Holler? Don't usually see you in here. Jack handed him the crumpled notice. When was this filed? Pike frowned, thumbing through the registry. Filed 4 days ago, same day the obit ran in the paper. Strake filed at noon. The bellman wasn't even buried till sundown. Jack's jaw tightened. That don't sit right. No, sir, Pike agreed softly. But legal's legal if no heirs listed. What about a will? None recorded. Probate's defaulted. Jack took off his hat. What if there's proof the boy's his son? Pike looked up. Then you'd better find it. And fast. Back at the ranch, Jack found Eli sitting on the back step, legs swinging. He had the saddlebag in his lap, picking through its meager contents. An old canteen, a worn Bible, a few silver coins. You ever go to town with your pa? Jack asked, sitting beside him. Eli nodded. Sometimes. He'd buy flour and tobacco. Once he let me ride with him to the schoolhouse. Schoolhouse? Jack asked, eyebrows raised. Miss Nora. She gave me a slate and said I wrote nice. Eli looked up. You think she'd remember me? Jack's smile flickered. I think it's worth asking. The next morning, they rode to the schoolhouse at the edge of Dusty Hollow. Nora Barrett was sweeping the steps when they arrived, her skirts tugged gently by the wind. Jack Holler, she said, hands on hips. You finally come to learn your letters? Jack chuckled. Not today, but I brought a student. Eli slid shyly off the horse and stood beside him. Nora crouched to his level. Well, I'll be... You're Eli Bell, aren't you? He nodded. I remember you. Big blue eyes, always asking why. Eli smiled for the first time in days. Jack stepped forward. We need your help, Nora. Court says there's no record of his birth. Strake's moving fast. Nora's brow furrowed. That can't be. I saw his pa bring the paper in myself. Wait. She dashed inside and returned with a fraying leather-bound registry. She flipped to the B's, then frowned. The page was torn. Eli's name, if it had been there, was gone. Jack cursed under his breath. Nora stared at the ragged seam. That page was whole last spring. Eli's voice broke the silence. My pa buried something once, behind the barn. Said it was in case men with bad shoes came knocking. Jack knelt. You remember where? Eli nodded. Jack rose slowly. Then saddle up, son. Because if Strake wanted to bury the truth, they'd just have to dig it up first. The old Bell place hadn't seen a rider in weeks, maybe months. The front gate leaned like it had given up, and the barn out back sagged under its own weight. The roof had a hole big enough to let in a hawk, and the grass around it was waist-high, whispering with wind and neglect. Jack Holler and Eli dismounted just past the fence line. Jack carried a spade. Eli held tight to the compass on his chest like it was the only thing that hadn't let him down. You sure it was here? Jack asked. Eli nodded and led him behind the barn. Pa always said, if men with soft hands start talking hard, dig near the cypress roots. Said that's where the truth don't rot. The cypress tree stood crooked, gnarled with age, its bark half split by lightning some years back. Jack tested the ground, soft from last week's rain. He dug 3 feet down before the metal of the spade hit something solid. Eli crouched beside him, eyes wide. Jack knelt and pulled up a rusted tin box. He brushed off the dirt and cracked it open. Inside, a folded military discharge paper, a faded photo of a woman with Eli's eyes, and, at the bottom, a deed, weather-stained and curled at the edges. But the ink was still visible. Jack read it once, then again, slower. Bell, Thomas W. Plot 18B, registered under Arizona Homestead Code, dated May 1st, 1877. But unsigned. Jack exhaled hard. It's his, but without the signature, the courts'll call it kindling. Eli stared down. That's his writing, though. I know it. I know, Jack said, gently folding the paper. But we'll need more. He tucked the documents back into the box, careful as if holding a flame. Then he looked at the compass around Eli's neck. Where'd this come from? Pa gave it to me, Eli said. Said it belonged to his father before him. Jack turned it over. The leather strap was cracked, the face chipped. But on the brass rim, faint but still there, were carved initials, TWB. Jack's eyes narrowed. Come on, he said, standing. I think I know who can help us. They rode to the far edge of town, past the last storefronts and out toward an old saddle shop with a faded green awning and a sign that swung on one chain. Inside, the scent of leather and pine oil hit strong. Belts, holsters, and bridles hung like laundry on wash day. Behind the counter, hunched over a needle and thread, sat Ezra Brand. Jack tipped his hat. Ezra. The old man looked up, peered through cracked glasses and grunted. Didn't think you still knew my name. Need your eyes, Jack said, setting the box on the counter. Ezra raised a brow and opened it. When he pulled out the deed, something in his posture changed. I drafted these, he muttered. Back when I worked the land office in Prescott. 1877 batch. Same seal, same phrasing. But those early forms had a flaw. Ink seal faded too quick. Folks stopped using them after 78. He held the paper to the light. Yep, seal's barely there now, but it's real. I'd stake my name on it. What if it was unsigned? Jack asked. Ezra frowned. Still counts for something, especially if you've got matching evidence. Who's this compass belong to? Eli stepped forward, holding it up. My pa's. He said it always pointed home. Ezra examined it, squinting. TWB. That's Thomas Bell, all right. I logged that name myself back then. He looked between them. You got enough for a case. Maybe not to win, but enough to stall the snake. Jack nodded, jaw tight. That's all I need right now. Outside, Eli looked up at Jack as they mounted. Pa said cowboys don't always have badges, but they carry codes, like north on a compass. Jack smiled faintly. Well, kid, reckon we just found ours. And as they rode back toward Holler Ranch, a storm brewed quiet on the horizon, not in the sky, but in the courtroom where truth was about to fight for a home. Dusty Hollow's annual county fair was the kind of event that made folks shake off their burdens for a day or two. The air was sweet with kettle corn and horse sweat, and children dashed between booths with sticky fingers and prize ribbons trailing like streamers. It was the one time of year when folks from all corners of the valley came together, no matter their politics, debts, or differences. Jack hadn't planned on going. He'd rather spend the afternoon checking fence lines and watching the north pasture for Strake's men. But Eli had never been to a fair, and when the boy stood on the porch that morning, hair slicked and shirt tucked in, Jack couldn't find it in him to say no. They arrived just after noon, the ranch buggy creaking along the main path. Nora Barrett met them near the entry gate, her cheeks sun-pink and eyes kind. She was judging the pie competition this year, clipboard in hand. "Thought I might see you two," she said with a smile. "Eli, you planning to win that pony race?" Eli blinked. "I can sign up?" Nora nodded toward a sign-up table near the corral. "Still time." Jack started to protest, but Nora shot him a look. "Let him feel like a kid, Jack, just for an hour." So Eli ran off, legs bouncing, cheeks flushed. Jack watched him go, heart thudding in ways he wasn't used to. He made his way to the feed tent, picking up a lemonade and scanning the fairgrounds. Then he spotted Bernard Strake. The man stood atop a makeshift platform, shaking hands with ranchers and merchants like he was running for governor. Behind him, a new banner read, "Progress and Prosperity. Together we grow." Strake raised his arms and spoke like a preacher at revival. "There are those who'd rather squat on unclaimed land than see this valley rise. We must clear the brush if we want real harvest." Jack stepped closer, fists clenched. Strake's eyes met his across the crowd, briefly, and the grin that followed was colder than a winter wind. Back at the corral, the youth pony race began. Kids lined up with nervous grins and wobbly saddles. Eli's pony was small but quick, and the boy held the reins like he meant it. "On my count," barked the fair marshal. Then came the whistle. The ponies took off in a blur of hooves and dust. Jack leaned forward on the rail, watching Eli hang tight, his jaw set like he was riding for more than ribbons. And somehow, against older boys and longer legs, he crossed the finish line first. The crowd whooped. Eli beamed, panting hard, hair whipped back by wind and speed. Jack felt something tighten in his chest, pride maybe, or something deeper. That night they returned to the ranch under a half moon. Jack stabled the horses while Eli carried his ribbon into the bunkhouse like it was made of gold. But when Jack stepped inside, something was off. The tack room door stood open. The air smelled wrong, like oil and old sweat. He rushed in, heart pounding. The tin box was gone. "Eli!" Jack called, voice sharp. The boy came running, still holding the ribbon. "It's gone," Jack said, searching shelves, overturning a saddle blanket. Eli's face fell. "You think it was him?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next morning, Nora arrived early, her arms full of supplies, and a curious look on her face. "I went looking for an old ledger at the schoolhouse," she said. "Thought maybe I'd tucked something in it." She handed Jack a thin book. Found this instead. Folded between pages of outdated attendance logs was a carbon copy of the same deed they'd found in the tin box. Same land, same name, slightly smudged, but still legible. Jack stared at it, then looked at her. "You sure this is real?" Nora nodded. "He must have hidden copies in case of trouble." Jack exhaled. "Trouble found us, but now we've got something to throw back." He walked out to the porch where Eli sat with the compass in his hand. "Son," he said, "we're not done fighting. You up for that?" Eli looked up. "Long as you're standing beside me." Jack tipped his hat. "Always." And this time, he meant it like a promise. The courthouse in Dusty Hollow was quieter than usual that Monday morning, the kind of quiet that settled over a town right before a storm. Jack Holler walked through its front doors with Eli at his side and Nora just behind, clutching the carbon deed tight in one hand and Ezra Brand's signed affidavit in the other. Inside, Clerk Merton Pike looked up, surprised. "Mr. Holler, back again?" Jack nodded, tipping his hat. "Here to file a claim, on behalf of Eli Bell." He laid the documents on the counter: carbon deed, compass photograph, affidavit from Ezra verifying the 1877 form. Then he added a small hand-sketched map marking the cypress tree and burial spot where they'd found the original. Pike adjusted his glasses and leaned in close. "You sure about this, Jack? Once it's entered, it's public. Strake'll know in an hour." "Let him," Jack said flatly. "He's known too much in secret." Eli stood quiet, watching every word. When the ink dried, Pike nodded. "It's official. Temporary injunction on the land. Court date in a week." Jack exhaled. "That's all I needed." They rode back under a sky that had started to darken, not with rain, but with a tension Jack could feel in his bones. He didn't trust silence when it followed good news. That night, the wind howled harder than usual. Jack double-checked the barn locks and fed the horses himself. He tucked Eli into the bunkhouse with a warm quilt and promised he'd be up early to cook flapjacks. But around midnight, something snapped him from sleep, the unmistakable crackle of fire. He bolted upright. A glow flickered against the north window. The bunkhouse. Jack sprinted barefoot across the yard, heart slamming against his ribs. Flames curled along the roof, licking at the eaves, heat blasting from the open door. "Eli!" he roared. No answer. Without a thought, Jack threw his arm across his face and plunged into the smoke. The heat was blinding, the air thick and bitter. He found Eli curled beneath the cot, coughing, clutching the compass to his chest. Jack grabbed him, hoisted him over his shoulder, and staggered out just as the roof gave a groan and collapsed inward. They hit the dirt hard. Jack rolled Eli off, patting at the boy's back until he coughed clear. The compass still hung from his neck, the leather scorched but intact. Nora came running from the main house in her nightgown, face pale. "My God, is he—" "He's all right," Jack rasped. "Get him to the barn. I'll follow." By sunrise, only a blackened husk remained where the bunkhouse had stood. Jack sifted through the ashes, eyes narrowed, skin raw from smoke. Near what used to be the door, he found a partial footprint, pressed deep into the wet earth where the fire hadn't reached. The heel was smooth, worn, nearly flat, except for one detail. At the very back of the heel, glinting faintly in the morning light, was a tiny strip of metal, gold-plated, decorative, custom. Jack had seen it once before, on Bernard Strake's polished boots. He stared at it a long moment, then looked back at the barn where Nora sat with Eli, cradling the boy gently, brushing soot from his forehead like a mother would. Jack rose slow, his voice low. "This ain't just about land anymore." He walked to the porch, saddlebag in hand, and loaded the documents again. Then he took the heel scrap and wrapped it in oilcloth, tucked it into his coat. Before heading to town, he crouched beside Eli. "I'm leaving you here with Miss Nora," he said, "just for a little while." The boy grabbed his sleeve. "You coming back?" Jack nodded. "Soon as I've made 'em listen." Eli didn't cry, just tightened his grip on the compass. And as Jack rode out, dust trailing behind, he didn't look back. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew, if he did, he might not have the heart to ride away at all. The morning light had barely stretched across the town of Cold Rock when the sheriff's voice cut through the quiet like a saw through pine. "Jack Holler," he called. "By order of the county, you're under arrest for harboring a minor without guardianship rights." Jack stepped out of the feed store with dust on his sleeves and calm in his eyes. "You letting Strake write your laws now, Hank?" he asked, nodding toward Bernard Strake, who stood nearby with a smug grin and silver glinting from his coat buttons. "Don't make this harder, Jack," the sheriff muttered. "Ain't personal." Jack glanced down the street. Folks were peering from behind curtains and porch rails. Eli stood in front of the jail, barefoot and silent, holding a sign scribbled in charcoal. "He's my PA." That boy's hands didn't shake, but his lower lip did. Strake grinned. "Looks like even the kid's lost it. Might want to check his head." Jack didn't flinch as the sheriff cuffed his wrists. He didn't speak as the jail cell clanged shut, but inside, something hardened like drought-cracked earth. The jail smelled of rust and regret. Jack sat on the bench, jaw tight, staring at the dust motes dancing through the slatted sunlight. Hours passed. The sheriff brought dry bread and a tin of water. Jack ignored both. Then the cell door creaked again. An older man stepped in, thin, bent like an old fence post, hair slicked back with nervous hands. "Name's Leon Pritchard," he said, voice low. "Used to clerk probate files till the courthouse fire 3 years back." Jack eyed him. "That so?" Leon nodded, throat bobbing. "I knew Eli's real pa, Matthew Krause. Quiet man, ex-cavalry. Came in one spring with a deed. Said he finally got his homestead formalized. Asked me to double log it, just in case." Jack sat forward. "You still got it?" Leon reached into his coat and pulled out a burlap feed sack. Inside, a leather-bound logbook, edges singed but legible. "I kept it," Leon said. "Didn't trust the fire marshal's accident story." Jack flipped through the pages. Page 3 or 12. There it was. Matthew Krause, 160 acres, signed 1877, witnessed by Ezra Brand. Jack let out a slow breath. "Why now?" Leon shrugged. "Saw the boys sign. Figured maybe truth mattered again." That night, Jack sat alone in the cell with the logbook open on his knees and the old compass Eli had left in his vest pocket. The brass edges were worn, initials still faintly visible. MC. In the morning, the sheriff opened the cell with a scowl. "You're free. Judge wants to see you. Says he don't like being made a fool." Jack stepped out into the light. Eli ran up and wrapped his arms tight around Jack's waist. "You okay, Pa?" Jack ruffled his hair. "Better now." Strake stood across the street, arms crossed, lips thin. "This don't change a thing," he called. "You think some old logbook's gonna beat me?" Jack just tipped his hat. "We'll let the courthouse decide." But inside, Jack knew, this time the boy's truth wasn't standing alone. The next step would be on the courthouse steps, public, loud, and finally, fair. By noon, the entire town of Cold Rock was buzzing. A makeshift bench had been hauled onto the wide porch of the courthouse, flanked by 2 oak chairs and a canvas canopy flapping gently in the breeze. Judge Thaddeus Monroe, white-bearded, stern, and straight-backed despite his 70 years, tapped his cane once on the planks as folks gathered close. "This ain't formal court," he said, voice gravelly but clear. "But when land's in question and the people are watching, I figure it best we do things where the sun can shine on 'em." Jack Holler stood to one side, dressed neat in a clean shirt and his oldest boots. Nora stood just behind him, hands folded tight. Eli sat on the top courthouse step, compass around his neck, knees pulled close. Across the porch, Bernard Strake stood with his attorney, slick-haired, sharp-suited, and already smirking. Judge Monroe adjusted his spectacles. "Let's hear the claim." Jack stepped forward. "The boy's name is Eli Krause, son of Matthew Krause. This here," he held up the worn logbook Leon Pritchard had rescued, "proves a deed was filed in 1877 under the Homestead Act, witnessed by Ezra Brand, registered before the fire." He laid it down on the judge's table. Next came the carbon deed found in the schoolhouse ledger, then Ezra's affidavit, signed and notarized. Strake's lawyer snorted. "With all due respect, Judge, none of that matters without a direct living heir. The boy's got no proof he's Matthew's son." Turned, lifted the compass from Eli's neck. His pa gave him this, engraved with the initials MC, same as the logbook, same as the original deed. Eli stood slowly and walked up to the judge. "Pa said it would always point home," he said quietly. "It brought me to Jack." The crowd hushed. Even Strake looked off balance for a breath. Monroe studied the compass, his lined fingers brushing the engraving. "I knew Matt Krause. Fought beside him in El Paso. Quiet man. Honest to the bone." He paused, glancing at Jack. "Didn't strike me as the type to leave a boy behind." Strake's lawyer stepped forward. "Still, this isn't a courtroom, Your Honor." "No," Monroe said slowly. "But it's justice." Jack lifted one more item from his satchel, a photo, faded, cracked at the edges, of Matthew Krause holding a baby boy, standing beside a barn with a cypress tree in the background. Eli stepped forward, pointing. "That's our tree, the one where we dug up the box." A murmur ran through the crowd. Ezra Brand, seated with a cup of coffee, leaned forward. "I'll testify under oath. That's Krause's seal on the deed." Strake's lawyer cleared his throat. "My client wasn't aware of this secondary documentation." Jack looked to the judge. "That's because he set fire to the bunkhouse where the originals were kept. Found a piece of his boot heel in the mud. Gold-plated. Custom." Judge Monroe's face darkened. "You have the heel?" Jack nodded and handed over the wrapped scrap. Monroe unrolled it, ran a thumb along the edge. Then he looked at Strake. "You got anything to say for yourself?" Strake started to speak, but instead turned on his heel and walked right into the deputy sheriff standing behind him, hand already on the cuffs. A cheer broke out, hesitant at first, then full-throated as the townsfolk realized what just happened. Judge Monroe raised a hand. "This court recognizes Eli Krause as rightful heir. All transfers of his father's land are hereby frozen pending full verification. Guardianship claim filed by Jack Holler is noted and will be considered at the next session." He leaned back, tapping his cane again. "Sometimes justice don't wear robes. Sometimes it rides in with a saddlebag full of truth." Eli stepped beside Jack, still holding the compass. When asked who he chose to stay with, the boy looked up and said, clear as spring water, "Him." And just like that, it was settled. Not by firepower or gold, but by truth carried in a child's voice. And the crowd knew it. By the time Bernard Strake sat inside the county jail, he no longer looked like the man who'd strutted through the Dusty Hollow fairgrounds with silver buttons and clean boots. His coat was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and the fire in his eyes had gone cold. Sheriff Hank, now stripped of his badge by order of Judge Monroe, stood just outside the cell, arms folded. "You thought nobody would check your filings," he muttered. "But when a boy stands on a jailhouse step calling a cowboy pa, folks start looking closer." Inside the judge's chamber, the full audit had begun. Jack stood to one side while Leon Pritchard, the old clerk who'd brought the logbook, and Ezra Brand, the retired lawyer turned saddlemaker, reviewed stacks of deeds and probate papers alongside Judge Monroe and a new deputy from Prescott. "Look here," Ezra said, pointing at a sheet. "This signature's copied, same loop, same tail, across 5 different names." Leon squinted. "And these parcels? They all back up to that same creek. You reckon he's been targeting water access?" Jack nodded. "Wouldn't be the first snake to steal with a pen instead of a pistol." The judge tapped a document. "And this one was filed by the same notary who's been dead 7 years. It didn't take long. Over a dozen land transfers bore signs of forgery, invalid signatures, misdated forms, duplicate witness names. Strake hadn't just been gunning for Eli's inheritance. He'd been carving up the territory one fake claim at a time, betting no one would look too close. By evening, Monroe issued a formal freeze on all of Strake's holdings. His ranch, bank accounts, and business permits were seized for investigation. The townsfolk, many of whom had quietly lost grazing rights or water ditches, gathered near the courthouse as word spread. Nora found Jack leaning against the porch rail, hat tipped low. "Eli's in the schoolhouse with the other kids," she said. "Still got that compass around his neck like it's stitched to him." Jack smiled softly. "Reckon it is now." She stepped closer. "The judge signed guardianship, in your name. Thought you'd want to be there." Jack hesitated. "Ain't never been much good at families." Nora touched his arm. "You're already doing it." He looked toward the courthouse window where a shadow flickered behind the curtain. A boy's silhouette, tall, skinny, still growing into his boots. Inside, Judge Monroe folded the final paper. "It's done," he said. "You're his legal guardian." Jack nodded, quiet. Strake was escorted out of the courthouse under guard, cuffs clicking at his wrists. Townsfolk watched in silence, some satisfied, some stunned. As he passed Jack, he sneered, "You think you've won? You're just a dirt rancher with a loud heart." Jack stepped forward, voice calm but steel-edged. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Strake was hauled off toward the Prescott holding coach. Dust kicked up behind him like the last breath of a dying storm. Later that evening, as the sun slipped low behind the hills, the townspeople gathered on the old church lawn for what someone called a potluck of peace. Lanterns hung from fence posts. A fiddler played something soft and slow. Eli sat beside Jack, spooning beans onto his plate, watching the lantern light flicker. "You ever think it'd end like this?" the boy asked. Jack shook his head. "Didn't think it'd start." The mayor approached quietly, tipping his hat. "We're looking to rebuild the orphan registry. Make sure this don't happen again. Thinking we could use a man like you, Holler. Someone who knows how to spot a lie." Jack didn't answer right away. He looked down at Eli's plate, then out at the sky. "Let me think on it," he said. "Got something more important to tend first." Eli glanced up. "Like what?" Jack smiled. "Your next pair of boots. Can't have my son outgrowing me." And under the lantern glow, the boy smiled wider than he had in weeks. The sky over Cold Rock was clear that morning, the kind of blue that only came after a long storm had finally passed. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh hay, and the last hammer struck the new bunkhouse beam with a solid thunk that echoed across the pasture. Jack Holler stepped back to admire the rebuild. Stronger walls, thicker roof, a fresh coat of whitewash that made the whole thing shine like something sacred. It wasn't just a shelter now, it was a promise kept. Behind him, Eli was brushing the coat of a young calf, a sturdy little red with a white streak down its face. "You ready?" Jack asked, voice gentle. Eli nodded, clutching the long-handled branding iron with steady hands. It had taken weeks to design the mark, one that would tie past and future together in a single symbol. They'd settled on it together, an H resting over a compass star, Holler in direction, a name and a truth. Jack steadied the calf, whispering something calm into its ear. Eli stepped up and pressed the iron clean and sure. A hiss, a sharp smell, then silence. The calf kicked once, then settled. "You did good," Jack said. "Real good." Eli smiled, pride flickering in his eyes like sunlight through cottonwood leaves. Nora arrived not long after with a wrapped parcel tucked under one arm and the kind of grin that meant trouble or pie, or both. "Thought I'd bring a little housewarming," she teased. Jack raised an eyebrow. "For the bunkhouse?" "For the boy," she said, handing the parcel to Eli. He tore it open, revealing a dark leather vest, stitched with care, a small compass embroidered on the inside lining. "Figured he ought to look the part now," she said, "since folks been calling him Holler." Eli looked up wide-eyed. "Can I really?" Jack stepped closer, rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "If you want it, it's yours, name and all." Eli nodded slowly, then straightened his back like he'd been waiting all his life to carry something worth holding. "Eli Holler," he said aloud, testing it. "Sounds right." They walked to the porch, where Jack had hung an old nail above the mantel. From it dangled the compass, its brass edges still tarnished, its face scratched, but its needle true as ever. Jack touched it once, then looked to Eli. "You keep this nearby," he said. "Even when you don't know the way, it'll remind you where you came from." Eli looked up. "From here?" Jack nodded. "From family." Later that afternoon, while Eli helped the ranch hands water the herd, Jack sat with Nora beneath the shade of the barn's new eaves. "He's different now," she said softly. "Quieter inside, but stronger." "Like the land," Jack replied. "Storms come and strip it bare, but it still grows, if you give it care." She studied him a moment, eyes warm. "You ever think you'd end up with a family?" Jack chuckled, low and dry. "Didn't think I'd end up with a bunkhouse either. But here you are." He looked out toward the pasture, where Eli ran along the fence line, his vest flapping behind him like a flag. "Here I am," he echoed. As the sun dropped low, painting the sky with streaks of gold and rose, Eli returned with a piece of scrap wood he'd found in the barn. On it, in chalk, he'd written, "Holler Ranch, where lost things get found." Jack ran a hand over the words, throat tight. He didn't say anything, didn't have to, because sometimes the loudest kind of justice didn't come from a gavel or a badge. Sometimes it came from a boy's hand, and the brand he chose to carry. If you believe cowboys still stand up for the little guy, and that a compass always finds its way home, saddle up and subscribe for more stories just like this.